In the 2004 and 2005 years, the attention of Americans was focused on the case of Scott Peterson, who killed his wife and unborn son. News channels, with bated breath, reported on each new turn in the investigation, then in the trial. They carefully followed the life of Scott Peterson, his mistress, and the antics of his lawyers. However, for certain reasons, the national media ignored another case, even more strange and shocking. It wasn't just the number of victims that was striking. The circumstances of the incident seemed much more strange. And even today, this case does not fit into the minds of ordinary people. The main reason for the silence of the media was simple. The main character is a black man named Marcus Wesson. The thing is that there is an unspoken rule among the Western media. Do not expose Negroes in a negative way. If something is said about them, it should be entirely positive things. But let's get closer to the story. Marcus Wesson was born on August 22, 1946 year in Kansas, and was the eldest child in the family. His parents were members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Their religious views were also passed on to children. Marcus himself claimed that his mother was a religious fanatic and his father was an alcoholic and a child rapist, who left the family when Marcus was still a child. In the early 60s of the last century, the family moved to San Bernardino, California. After graduating from high school, Wesson joined the Army, where he served from 1969-60th year. He served in Europe, where he drove an ambulance. In 1968 year, after returning from the Army, 21-year-old Marcus Wesson met a 30-year-old Spanish woman, Rosemary Terena. Together they moved to San Jose, where the couple had a son 3 years later. Rosemary had a daughter, Elizabeth, from a previous marriage. In 1974, Marcus began raping 8-year-old Elizabeth, and 6 years later, 27-year-old Marcus married 14-year-old Elizabeth. A few months later, she gave birth to his first child. In the next 16 years, she would bear him 10 children. However, one of them will be stillborn. Elizabeth had a younger sister named Rosemary Solorio, and she, like her older sister, fell under the spell of Wesson. In 1986, she sent her 7 children to live with the Wessons under the pretext that because of Solorio's drug problems, she could not take care of them. As a result, the Wesson family grew to a huge size. Marcus Wesson couldn't hold on to any of his jobs for long. Therefore, the main item of his income was benefits. The family was constantly moving from one place of residence to another. Some of their places of residence were in a very deplorable state. For a while, the whole family lived in an 8-meter boat moored in the harbor of Santa Cruz. Often, in order to feed his family, Marcus took discarded burgers from the trash cans of the nearest McDonald's restaurant and took them to his children. However, the boat gave him trouble. He did not indicate it as an asset in the documents for receiving benefits, for which, in 1990, he was imprisoned for benefit fraud. Since the second half of the 90s, the family lived in a trailer and a large army tent in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where there was not even running water. The Wessons also lived for some time in a dilapidated 20-meter towboat on the coast of California. Sometimes they lived on the school bus. By the end of the 90s, the children of Marcus and Elizabeth Wesson were already old enough to work. Marcus took all the money they earned and used it to buy a building in Fresno, where the main events of this story will unfold. None of the children ever went to school. Marcus taught them independently at home from school textbooks and study cards. In addition, he taught them their own Christian direction. He was a fan of the sectarian David Koresh, who, along with his 80 followers, died during the siege of his estate in Texas by the FBI in 1993. Marcus Wesson also created a cult of his personality among children. He described himself as Jesus Christ and the police as accomplices of Satan. When the family watched the news on TV about the sect branch of David Koresh, Wesson told the children, "This is how the world attacks God's people. This man is just like me. He made children for the Almighty. We have to do the same. We must make children for the Almighty." Marcus told his family that they should be prepared to die if someone tried to break into their home. To his niece Rosa Solorio and her daughter Sabrina Wesson, he said that they were strong soldiers who should hunt down and kill those family members who betrayed Marcus, and who may have to kill the whole family, including themselves, to prevent an invasion. Anticipating something similar, Wesson bought 10 coffins in reserve from an antique dealer. Wesson really liked vampires, so he gave himself, his daughters and nieces vampire names. So, for example, he asked to call himself Eve Marcus Peer, a mixture of the names Jesus, Marcus, and vampire. Marcus Wesson started sleeping with his daughters and nieces after he got out of prison in 1990. According to the testimony of Ruby Ortiz, niece Solorio, one of the nieces who was sent to live with Wesson, Marcus started raping her when she was 8 years old. She claimed that she loved Marcus, and at the age of 13, she proposed to him to get married. The wedding ceremony consisted of the couple putting their hands on the Bible and reading the vows. In total, Wesson married 3 of his nieces and 2 of his own daughters. From each of them he had children. His first wife, Elizabeth Wesson, fully approved of such incestuous unions. When Ruby Solorio ran away from home as a teenager, Elizabeth convinced her to return home to take care of her son from Marcus. Rubertus stated that Marcus was violent and domineering. He isolated the children from the outside world, beat her with a stick or a baseball bat when she talked to the boys, or refused to learn lessons. Despite all the cruelty, many family members warmly recalled life with Marcus Wesson. He came up with entertainment for the family, such as plays, concerts, and ugly contests, in which children had to dress up as ugly as possible. The Wessons often scared the neighbors. Marcus himself, for example, weighs about 180 kilograms. One of the neighbors in Fresno described his hair as one big greasy lump of dreadlocks, as if the hair consisted only of dirt and fat. When Marcus needed to go with his family to the outside world, the women wore black robes and moved exclusively behind him, in absolute silence, with downcast eyes. When the Wessons lived on a boat, if Marcus needed to get ashore, he would get into a smaller boat. The women took up the oars and carried him to the shore. They waited for him without leaving the boat, and then drove him back. Many believed that he kept the girls in slavery. At home, women had to wear long black skirts, white or gray blouses, and black high-heeled shoes. All the boys, like most of the girls, left home when they were old enough. However, 2 daughters, Sabrina Wesson and Elizabeth Brinny Wesson, as well as one of the nieces, Rosa Solorio, stayed with their father as adults to help the family. In addition to them, there were several small children in the house. In the 2003 year, Wesson purchased a house in Fresno, which was previously used as an office building. The building was built in 1966 year and had an area of about 100 square meters. According to the documents, the building was purchased in the name of Rosa Solorio for $100,000. The city authorities decided to evict the family members since this building was not intended for living. Subsequently, many will say that the prospect of eviction played a role in further events. On Friday, the 12th of March, 2004 year, 2 of his nieces Ruby Ortiz and Sefina Solorio came to Marcus. They demanded that Wesson give them their daughters. He refused, and the other women in the house attacked their nieces and began calling them Judas, harlots, and devils. They had to leave without children. But later they returned to the house, but with the police. The officers ordered Marcus to leave the house, but he continued to hide in the building. Then the police called the city prosecutor to the place, who explained to Spring, who came out on the threshold, that he had no legal grounds to be inside the building. Wesson listened to him, turned around, and slammed the door behind him. Then Rosario and Elizabeth Wesson came out of the house and told the police that Marcus had a gun. The police called for reinforcements and special forces. As soon as they took up positions around the house, the door opened and 57-year-old Marcus Wesson came out. He was covered in blood. The man decided to surrender to the police. What the police found inside the building was so terrible that some employees had to take a vacation and visit a psychologist. There were 9 bodies in the house. Each had one eye shot out. All the bodies were entwined in a bloody pile of clothes. The victims ranged in age from 1 to 25. The 2 victims were the daughters of Marcus Wesson. The other 7 were the children of his daughters and nieces. All of them were under 8 years old. 10 coffins, bought earlier by Wesson, stood along the wall of one of the rooms. Rumor has it that Wesson bought these antique coffins, which were much larger than usual. The coffins were made of rare wood. Artful drawings were carved on them. And Wesson was allegedly going to disassemble these coffins and make furniture and caskets from there would for subsequent resale. That night, 6 police priests arrived at the Wessons' building, where the police were working. They were supposed to comfort the detectives who were working with the evidence. The mayor of Fresno said that the city will never be the same after the largest mass murder in its history. Distraught by the news of the mass murder, some relatives of the victims lost consciousness near this building. Later it turned out that the 4 women who watched every turn of the case with horror were the mothers of the children in the house. The father of these children was one Marcus Wesson. According to police, the bodies were so intertwined that it took them several hours to determine the exact number of victims. The investigation of the crime scene began at 10 o'clock in the evening and continued until the morning. Neither the fingerprints on the gun nor the remains of gunpowder gave investigators an answer to the question who fired the murder weapon. But Wesson's surviving children testified that he had a high degree of control over his large clan. He preached daily to the family, weaving the dogma of polygamy and incest from his interpretations of the Bible and Seventh-day Adventist beliefs. He was particularly harsh with young women who testified that they were homeschooled and had little contact with anyone other than family. Wesson beat women if they talked to other men, and began raping them when they were 7 or 8 years old. He took all the money he earned from family members and told them what they should eat. While the police were trying to piece together this complex puzzle, Marcus Wesson remained in custody with a fixed bail of $9 million. He remained calm and cooperated with the police. Wesson was charged on the 17th of March, 2004 year. Fresno Police Chief Jerry Dyer said authorities had no doubt that someone other than Marcus was involved in the murders. Toxicological examinations of the victims were carried out to find out whether they were intoxicated at the time of death. The director of public relations for the Central California Seventh-day Adventist Conference said that Marcus Wesson had never been a member of this religious organization. Although Wesson was in contact with Adventist churches from time to time, and his parents were members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He worked as a janitor in Soquel in the 80s and early 90s, and sometimes brought his children to church services. Several members of his extended family, Sabrina Wesson, Kiana Wesson, Safina Solorio, and Ruby Sanchez, were members of the church. Marcus' eldest son, 29-year-old Dorian Wesson, supported his father, saying that he could not do that. He added that if he thought his father was capable of killing children, he would personally end it. He told about his family, and said that his sisters had been artificially inseminated. Their father never raped them. Carrie Wesson, the defendant's mother, also spoke out. "I don't recognize Marcus Wesson on TV. That's not my son. It's a Christian family, it's not a cult." She described Marcus as a bright, intelligent child who loved animals. He and his family avoided dancing, dressed modestly, and were vegetarians. To identify the victims, the police had to use DNA testing. The coroner reported that it did not appear that any of the victims resisted, and the bodies were not mutilated. The cause of death in all cases was called an instantaneous perforation of the brain, caused by a gunshot wound to the face. At the end of March 2004 year, the bodies were cremated, and the ashes were handed over to relatives. The public support was also huge. Meanwhile, Wesson himself twice delayed the indictment, insisting that he did not need a public defender. He wanted to hire two private lawyers from fairly well-known and expensive law firms at once. However, many doubted that he could afford such lawyers. Wesson was monitored around the clock in prison. He was forbidden to see his relatives. On Wednesday, April 7, 2000, Marcus Wesson was charged with 33 counts of sexual assault. Among the evidence found at the crime scene was a gun. Traces of powder gases on Wesson's hands were checked, as well as fingerprints on the handle. At the preliminary hearing, Wesson refused to plead guilty. The lawyer who was appointed to him by the court, Pete Jones, also claimed that his client was innocent. The lawyer questioned the police officers, who found a .22 caliber pistol and a hunting knife at the crime scene. Both objects were lying under the body of the older victim, 25-year-old Sabrina Wesson. The bullet went through her eye and went up, and her body lay on top of the other bodies. In other words, the lawyer claimed that Sabrina killed 8 people and then committed suicide. This version coincided with the suicide pact that the family had concluded a few years ago. When the authorities try to interfere in the family's affairs, the children should kill themselves. And one of Wesson's older daughters confirmed this version. On the other hand, the prosecutor claimed that Wesson shot all the victims herself. Judge Lawrence Jones ruled that there was enough evidence against Wesson to stand trial on charges of murdering 9 of his children. If found guilty, he could be sentenced to death. Other testimony at the hearing included allegations of sexual and physical abuse by Wesson. It was alleged that Wesson began raping his daughters when they were just 5 years old. When one of the girls got pregnant, Wesson told her to tell everyone that she had been artificially inseminated. Marcus Wesson also sent a letter to the Fresno Bee newspaper, in which he told them about an early biographical book he had written. It turned out that his book called In the Night of Light for Darkness really existed, but was rejected in 2002 by a New York publishing house. In court sessions, which took place one after another, Marcus Wesson insisted that he did not kill anyone. His lawyers continued to convince the jury and the judge that the deceased Sabrina Wesson was guilty of all the murders. As a result, the jury refused to find Wesson guilty of committing the deadly shots. However, he was convicted of murder anyway, because the jury felt that it was he who pushed the children to commit suicide. On the 17th of June, 2005 year, Marcus Wesson was found guilty of 9 counts of murder in the first degree, and also found guilty on 14 counts of sexual harassment of minors and rape. 10 days later, on June 27, 2005, Wesson was sentenced to death. He is currently awaiting execution at San Quin's State Prison. If you liked this video, please like it and write a comment. Currently, this is the only possible non-material support for authors. Thank you all. See you soon.